Hello. Hello. हेलो आ रहा है आएगा रुक अनलिस्टेड सेटिंग में शायद आ रहा है हाँ Hi guys, welcome to my channel. I'm your coach Vishal. So today's topic is types of joints and the movements that are possible at those particular joints. So let me just quickly tell you about these joints. So there are three categories in which your joints are available. The first category is immovable. The second category is semi-movable, and the third category is freely movable. So immovable joint. Let me talk about immovable joint. Whenever two bones come together and they fuse with each other and they produce no movement, these are the joints where you will find no movement. And the simple example of this type of joint is your skull. So the next category that I will be talking about is the joints that move slightly. So there are two bones coming together, basically articulating and connecting to each other, but there is still slight movement. They can move, but the movement is very limited. So if I were to tell you some examples about these joints, so it is your sternum and the ribs. Now, these two bones come together and they connect between themselves through a cartilage known as hyaline cartilage. So there is slight movement, and also the joint between your vertebrae. So when in your spine you have your vertebrae placed over each other, so there is slight movement between them, and that is called as semi-movable joint. So now we move on to the third category, which is freely movable joint. Those joint where there is a lot of movement are called as, or are can be categorized into a category known as freely movable or a diarthrosis joint. So if I want to give examples of these joints, so elbow, shoulder, hip, knee, ankle, these are the joints that move freely, right? So let's have understanding about these joints, what all movements are possible at these particular joints. I've seen a major confusion in trainers or even clients now when it comes to knowing what movements are possible and what are those movements called as. So let's start with the head or the neck joint. Okay, so let me stand sideways. If I stand sideways, there is an 180-degree angle. You can see, right? I'm standing upright and it's 180-degree. So move my neck forward. So there is a reduction in the angle of joint. Now initially it was 180. Now it has reduced. So whenever there is a reduction in the angle of the joint below 180-degree, that movement is called flexion. So if I stand this way, if I move my head forward, this will be called as flexion. So if I move my head back to 180 degrees, which you can see it from sideways, this is called as extension. So if I move my head beyond 180-degree angle, which is hyperextension. So this particular movement is called hyperextension. So let me show it from the front. If I move my head forward, this is called flexion. If I keep my head straight, this is called extension. If I move my head backward, this is called hyperextension. So at your neck joint or your neck at your neck joint, there are three movements which are basically done by majority of the individual, which is flexion, extension and hyperextension. If I move my neck towards my right now this way, this is called as external rotation or a lateral flexion or lateral rotation. So if I move my head outwards, this is called lateral rotation or external rotation. If I move my head back to the center, this is called as medial rotation or internal rotation. So if I move my head outwards, this is lateral rotation. If I move it back to the normal head position, this is called medial rotation. If I bend my head towards the side, this is called lateral flexion. So I have flexion, I have extension, I can do hyperextension, I can also do lateral rotation, I can do medial rotation, I can also do lateral flexion, which is bending my head towards the side. So these are the movements that can be done at your neck joint. There's one more movement that can be done, which is called as a circumduction, guys. This is called circumduction. This is called rotation. So now we talk about the shoulder joint. So shoulder joint is a multi-axial joint. There is a variety of movement that can happen at my shoulder joint. So let's start with this. Okay, if I stand sideways, this is 180-degree angle. If I move my hand forward, this is called flexion. So this particular movement is called shoulder flexion. Look at it once again. So if I move forward, this is called shoulder flexion. I move my hand back, this is called shoulder extension. I move my hands beyond 180-degree, this is called hyperextension. So I can do flexion, I can do extension, I can also do hyperextension. So these are the three movements, basic movement that can happen at my shoulder joint. Apart from that, I can also do a movement like this, and this movement is called abduction. So this is called abduction. If I move my hand down back to the normal stance, this is called adduction. So this is abduction, this is adduction. I can do one more movement at my shoulder joint, which is a circumduction. So this movement is called circumduction. So I just reiterate my statement. This is flexion, extension, hyperextension, abduction, adduction, and circumduction. So if I want to train my back, I will have to do a shoulder extension, which is doing a movement like this. If I want to train my shoulders, I will have to do a movement that is shoulder flexion. If I want to train my back in another angle, then I can also do an action which is shoulder adduction. So there's one more movement, two more movements which can be also done at the shoulder joint, which one is doing this. So this particular movement, bringing my arm out from out to in, this is called as shoulder adduction. If I take my arms back outwards, this is called shoulder abduction. So this is shoulder adduction and shoulder abduction. So this particular movement helps you train your chest muscle. This particular movement helps you train your rear deltoid, which is your posterior deltoid. So for you to do train your muscles at your shoulder joints, such as your pectorals, such as your back, such as your trapezius, you can do a variety of actions. So there are few more movements that can be done even at the shoulder joint. One is lifting your shoulders up. So whenever I lift my scapula bone, which are these two bones at the back, so helping using the with the help of my trapezius muscle, if I do this action, this is called elevation. So this is elevation. This helps train my trapezius, which is an important muscle. If I move my shoulders down, this is called as depression. So elevation, depression. If I move my shoulders back, this action is called retraction. If I move my shoulder forward, this is called protraction. So at the shoulder joint, few more joints actions also happen. One is elevation done by the trapezius. Retraction again done by the trapezius, depression again done by the trapezius, but trapezius, as we know that this particular muscles have fibers running in three different directions: upper, middle and lower. The upper fibers help perform the action elevation, the middle and the lower fibers help you perform the action retraction as well as depression. So once we are done with the shoulder joints, we move down to the spine. So spine again, it's a lot of vertebrae. To be precise, 33 vertebrae placed over each other, and that's the structure as a unit is called as a spine. So spine. This is where these are the movements that can happen at your spine. So one movement you can do is your forward flexion. The other movement you can do is extension, and if I move my body behind crossing the 180-degree angle, this is called as hyperextension. So at my trunk or the vertebral spine, these are the three movements that can happen. Not just three, there are a few more, but let me just put these three together. One is the flexion, which is the reduction in the angle. The other is extension, which is most important while you sit and stand, and the other one is hyperextension, is going beyond the 180-degree angle. So at the spine or the as a unit, not as a single joint, but a multiple joints. Now you've got a lot of vertebra placed over each other, so they move as a unit. Now they don't move individually, they always end up moving as a unit. So at the spine you can move, you can also do some movements. One is moving outwards. So whenever I move out, this is called lateral or external rotation. If I move back from the back to the front, it's called medial rotation or internal. Let me put it again, let me show it again. So if I move out, this is lateral or external rotation. If I come back, this is called medial or internal rotation. So lateral rotation, medial rotation. I can also bend sideways. This is called as lateral flexion. So if I bend sideways, this is called lateral flexion. If I bend this side, this is called lateral flexion. So I have lateral rotation, medial rotation, lateral flexion. So these are the movements that can happen together as a unit at your vertebral or your trunk. Then let's talk about the hip joint. Hip joint may, if I move my leg up, this is called as hip flexion. If I move my leg down back to the normal stance, this is called hip extension. If I move my leg beyond 180 degree, this is called as hyperextension. So this is flexion, extension and hyperextension. If I lift my leg sideways, this is called abduction. If I lift my leg down back to the normal stand, this is called adduction. So abduction, adduction, flexion, extension, hyperextension. If I move, if I turn my leg outwards, this is called as external or lateral rotation. If I turn my limb inwards, this is called as medial or internal rotation. So we have your flexion, you have your extension, you have your hyperextension, you also have your abduction, adduction, external rotation, internal rotation, and one more movement that can happen also at your hip joint is called as circumduction, which is this. So these are the movements that can happen at your hip joint. Now we move forward to the knee joint. So knee joint is very simple joint. There are basically a movement, there are few movements that can happen at the knee joint. It's really simple. It can move only in one direction, which is reducing the angle of the joint. This is called flexion. If I move out, this is called extension. Hyperextension is not really possible at the knee joint. Some people may have hyperextended knees, but I don't call it a defect, but it can be called as a defect and may have some risk, and also called as a buckle knee. So if I turn my leg up using my hamstring muscle, there is a reduction in the angle. This is called as flexion. If I open back, this is called extension. So when I do exercises like squats, I will be doing Knee extension, which is done by my quadriceps. When I train my hamstring, I'll be doing knee flexion, which is done by my hamstring. So at the knee joint, what all movements you can do is flexion, extension, flexion, extension. Now we'll move back to the other joint, which is your ankle joint. So ankle joint may you can do movement like this. You can move your toe up, and this is called as a dorsiflexion. Let me show it sideways. If I move my toe up, this is called dorsiflexion. If I move my toes down, this is called plantar flexion. So dorsiflexion, plantar flexion, dorsiflexion, plantar flexion. So plantar flexion is the action performed by your calf muscle. So whenever I do this type of action, this movement is called as plantar flexion, performed by the muscles gastrocnemius and soleus, which is my calf muscle. If I move my toe up, this is performed by the muscle at the front or the anterior of my leg, and this is called as tibialis anterior. This muscle helps me perform the action known as dorsiflexion. There are another two actions which can happen at your ankle joint. So let me show one of it. So if I move my toe inwards, this is called inversion. If I move it out, this is called eversion. So inversion is moving my toe inwards. Eversion is moving my toe outwards. Let me try and show it sideways. So if I'm moving it inwards, this is called inversion. Let me show it from this side. If I move my toe outward, this is eversion. So inversion is inwards, eversion is outwards. So these are the basic movements that can happen at your freely movable joint, and majority of the time you will find clients, even the trainers are not confused basically with these movements. Now they have hard time understanding and remembering this movement. Which is why I felt it's important for me to make a video, so that now if not now, even in future, if you come across client or you come across difficulty where you're finding hard time to remember this movement, you can just watch my video, and I've tried to simplify as much as possible. So I just reiterate it. It will not take even 30 seconds for you to practice and remember. So let me show it once again. So this is flexion, extension, hyperextension, lateral rotation, medial rotation, lateral flexion, and now this is circumduction. Shoulder joint, flexion, extension, hyperextension, abduction, adduction, horizontal adduction, horizontal abduction, and circumduction. Trunk, flexion, sideways, flexion, extension, hyperextension, lateral rotation or external rotation, medial rotation or internal rotation. This is also called as lateral rotation, and this is also called as contralateral rotation, which is opposite to a lateral rotation. Then you can also do a lateral flexion, which is bending sideways. Now at the hip joint, flexion, extension, hyperextension, sideways, front, abduction, adduction, circumduction. You have your external or lateral rotation, you have medial or internal rotation. Then knee joint, you have your flexion, extension. Ankle joint, plantar flexion, dorsiflexion, eversion, outwards, inversions, inward. So these are the basic movements that you all as a trainer need to remember, and these movements will help you train the muscles in the best way. So if I want to train my chest muscle, I'll have to do a horizontal adduction. If I want to train my back muscle, I'll have to do a shoulder extension or a shoulder adduction. This is how you remember all the exercises. and the movement that happens at that particular joint and done by which muscle. So later I will try and cover up all the muscles and come up with a lot of fitness topic that will help you build your knowledge and become the best in the industry. And believe me, I've been in this industry for over 20 years. The thing that I have seen the trainers lack basically is applying science. So they've learned through their academies, but what has eventually happened, they have forgotten everything that they have learned, and they end up training themselves and their clients the way they have been doing for years. Now that you've learned yourself, now that you've upgraded yourself, now better try and apply the knowledge that you gain from your learnings into your training, so that you can train your client with the best possible results. The result is something that's more important when it comes to training. And why we need to know all these movements? Because we want to ensure that every client gets benefited with, and we want to ensure that every exercise we make them do is has maximum benefit with maximum safety. So this was it from my side for today's topic, which is types of joint. I did not go much into the types of joint because all that I wanted to cover up was what all movements are basically possible at or at any given joint in our body. So we have joints which don't move, we have joints that move slightly, we have most of the joints that we move while we exercise, and we need to know all the joints and what all directions they can move, so that we ensure that we train them or move them in the right direction, ensuring best results with minimum risk, or I call it no risk. So this was it from my side, guys. If you've liked my videos, please subscribe to my channel, please forward it to your friends and families. Let everyone who's interested in getting fit and becoming and having a healthy lifestyle get benefited through my knowledge and experience that I've got through over the over the years now. And I've been into teaching, so I constantly upgrade myself and try help people, aspiring trainers especially, who wants to get into fitness or take this up as a career. So this was it from my side. Thank you for being patient, and my audience for this 20-30 odd minutes, and good evening, and let's call it off for now today. Thank you very much, guys. Bye bye.